Pinyar the widow. Pinyar the widow was drying clothes by the fire when Mona and I went to see her. As usual, she was grumbling and cursing, shaking the wet clothes with an angry twag. Twag twag. Pinyar had been widowed when she was not yet 25, in the third month of her marriage to a good hearted man with whom she had hoped to make a new life. Before that, she had borne a son to another man, one she had lived with for some 5 years. His name was Orga, and he had come to her from a village beyond the Siam hills, far to the north of the country. He was a big, handsome man with laughing eyes, and he had swept the young Pinyar off her feet. Her family has opposed the liaison, saying quite openly that the clan of Orca was no good. They were trouble, but nothing could convince Pinyar, and one day she announced that she was pregnant with Orca's child. Her family called all the elders to negotiate and solemnize the marriage. Orca, however, skirted the issue, and though he acknowledged paternity within a year of the birth of their child, he was preparing cold heartedly to abandon Pinyar. They named their child Kamur. When he left for his village, Orca took Kamur with him, for the child was a son. Though he said he would return, he never did. Pinyar bowed her head in shame, but by all the laws of her clan, she alone was to blame for her misfortune, and there was nothing anyone could do about it. Some years later, her life seemed complete again when she became the wife of Lekon. Her family advised her to nurture this relationship and behave with propriety. But soon after they had married, Lekon was struck down one evening in a hunting accident. That had happened some 20 years ago. Now Pinyar lived alone and worked in the fields all day. In our villages, the fields are patchy clearings that dot the thickly wooded hillsides far from our homes. Every household has plots here for growing vegetables and herbs. These are the open workplaces that their owners grow so accustomed to that they set off from the home very early to work all morning, weeding, clearing, and planting. They carry their food with them, and when the sun is high overhead, they shelter in small thatched shacks and eat their midday meal and stretch out by the fire, sipping black tea. This outdoor life in the clear and silent space of the high valleys is addictive, and some villagers often spend the night in their solitary shacks. The others who live pile all the days picking of green chili, pumpkin, yam, and ginger into the basket before setting off on the long trek back to their village. It was on one such evening that Pinyar, walking home briskly, swinging her arms, had seen a young man running towards her at breakneck speed. He was shouting something, and sensing trouble, she too had hurried forward. Then she had heard the word fire. High her house had burned down. It had started with smoke billowing out of the thatch, the young man told her, and then suddenly the bamboo had exploded like cannon shots as the flames shot up and threatened to engulf the whole village with flying sparks. The villagers, the few who were around, had rallied to help, but it had been no use. Her poor widow's house was gone. When a house catches fire, the luckless owner is banished to the outskirts of the village. So Pinyar built herself a shark at the extreme edge of the forest. When I met her with Mona, she had just crossed the period of taboo, during which no one could go and eat with her for fear of provoking the tiger spirit that causes fires and tempting it to follow them home. Pinyar was still angry. The fire swallowed everything with an evil appetite, she told us, cracking another piece of the wet cloth before putting it away to dry. It seems my destiny is cursed. She sat down with us and recounted again how she was on the threshold of a new life when her husband was shot through the head in the forest. But these things happened, she said. Every year, at least 3 men die in hunting accident in our parts. Are all these deaths really accidents? Mona wanted me to ask. There is never any doubt about these deaths, Pinya replied. She looked down at her hands and was silent for a while. Then she said, "You know, I used to make this powder for the rice beer. I don't do it anymore." Then she told us why. Once upon a time, there lived a race of supernatural being called a Mitimili. These small, quiet peoples were first to make the mysterious CA, that is the yeast used to ferment rice into beer. Before the Mitty-Millie race disappeared, rearranged by strange vision, they gave this sacred powder to mankind, and a strong belief grew that CA had a special power, that it was something to be handled with respect. Only women were allowed to handle it, and Pinyar herself made the best CA cake. She mixed the white powder with ground rice and roots and berries and shaped it into small flat biscuits. However, they are strictly forbidden before a hunt or a journey, she said. It makes men hallucinate, just like the Mitty-Millie race. But sometimes some households forget to observe the rules, and then our men die in the forest. I was surprised. I knew it was very rare that a man who had shot someone during a hunt would be accused of murder. If he murdered his gun, he fled into the jungle to observe the prescribed taboos. Everyone accepted that it was an accident, but I had never heard the explanation that Pinyar was now giving us, now even from Hoxo. The man who made Pinyar a widow was now very old. Pinyar knew him well. She saw him in the village every day, but she did not hold him responsible for her misfortune. There is a bad spirit lurking in the CA that makes men go mad, she said. That is why we sprinkle CA on the eyelids of those who die an unnatural death, so that their spirit will not return on some restless search. Mona and I were silent. Pinyar looked at us with her black, slanting eyes and smiled. Despite her long, hard years, she was lean and agile. And she had cropped her hair very short like a man's. She did, however, observe the traditional custom of wearing large, cylindrical earrings that dragged her ears down, and she still wore all these beads, silver coins, and amulets that she had first put on as a young bride. The plight of widow Pinyar made me wonder if a woman's heart is not bigger than a man's. How she come to lose her child, then her husband, and finally her home in the village was common knowledge. But there was another story that people did not like to remember or recount. In a distant village, Pinyar's son from Orca had grown into an able-bodied young man. Kamur had done well for himself. He was a clerk in a government department that entailed him to live in a brick building in Pigo town, where he worked. He had married a good woman, a girl from our village, and was father to an infant daughter and 2 sons. One afternoon, the young wife was in the kitchen. Her long hair hung loose like a broad, thick rope, and she had a towel draped over her shoulder. In the adjoining room, her baby girl lay in a low cot that she could see through the door directly behind her. It was just at the moment when she had turned her back on the sleeping child when she heard a small sound, a sharp "nyek." She turned around and saw her husband standing by the cot holding a bloodied dao. Without a word, she turned and leaped out through the kitchen door. He came after her. The small garden gate was unlatched, but as she reached, she felt the blow on her back. She screamed, and as people came running out of the houses on either side, her husband dropped the sword and fell into the ground, blubbering and weeping. "What happened? What happened?" he asked. "What have I done?" He was the one most aghast at the horror. He could not remember anything of the murder of his baby girl, and he could not remember how he had stalked and cut down his younger son who had been cycling in the backyard. Only the older boy who was at the school has survived. Kamur begged forgiveness. He rolled on the floor in agony and said he had no memory of those black moments. All he could plead was that he must have been under a spell. An evil spirit must have traded his soul for that terrible hour when he picked up the rusty dao and went hunting for his children and for his wife, whose loose hair appeared to have defleated the blow that would have finished her. Everyone in the town who heard of the incident spat and remained silent. What was the meaning of this kind of thing? They understood that it was a nebulous zone that divided the world of spirit and men. In fact, at one time, men and spirits had been brothers. They knew that what was real could be an illusion, and the reality might only be the contest that the people gave to a moment. But they were shaken. Looking back, they saw that there had been signs. At least two other men in the town before Kamur had acted strangely, and one of them had killed himself. People talked about the peculiar trees of the place. They remembered the aubergine plant that had grown into the size of a tree. Nobody could recall who had planted it or when. It bore small poisonous looking flowers that grew into long blotted fruit, menacing and shiny. It was a ghostly tree, and no one dared to cut it down. Kamur had sometimes been seen under the tree at odd hours, doing nothing in particular. As on so many other occasions, the community rallied to restore the sense and orders. Kamur had never exhibited the least sign of derangement or psychopathic behavior before this. The poor man was more to be pitied than feared, some people argued. He is not to blame. It is something in the blood, the village elders had said when we heard of the incident. There are men and women, guardians of the history, who can identify this fault in the blood. The old people of our village have sat around speculating on clan titles and origin, on births, loves, marriages, and spirits and ghosts. The right or wrong kind of marriage, the right or wrong kind of life, could be traced to something in the blood, they said. Down the generations, certain traits appear suddenly in a nephew, an aunt, or great grandson. No one knew why. Some bloodlines are almost taboo to mention, they say. They see visions. They are visited by spirits, and like the Mitimili, they are seized by the bouts of the madness. The widow, Pinyar, I remember, was not part of these discussions. She had rushed to be by the side of her long lost son. She wept when she saw him, and she fought like a wild boar to shield him from the anger of the town. Kamur was put in the chains and locked up by the local police. But Pinyar arrived like a whirlwind, waving papers signed by a political representative who mattered. These papers approved a case for Kamur's release on the basis that his closest relative would keep him, and moreover that no one, not even his injured wife's family, was asking for punishment. It was a long and complicated process, but Pinyar's determination and swift actions saved the boy. Come, we will go home, she said to Kamur. We will go back to the village together. She returned with him to our village, and he lived there in his wife's house, surrounded and watched by her brothers and uncles. Everyone agreed that no one could ever really know what had happened. The truth, after all, exists only in proportions, and the rest is a matter of words changed by each person's perception. According to the account that I heard most often, Kamur had seen crowds of people pressing in on him. In panic and desperation, he had hunted for his gun, overturning cupboards, pulling out clothes, and running back and forth in the house. It was all a dream, for no one had heard him make a sound. But the sword he had used to cut his children down was real. He had found it on top of a big cupboard in the depression that he had been loosely covered with old newspaper and balls of strings and other bits of junk. After the madness, he had withdrawn into silence in prison, till Pinyar came to him. He heard her saying, "Come, we will go home. We will go back to the village together." And he broke down. He spoke in a stream then, like a frightened child. "I know, mother. You think there is something wrong with me, but it is not true. I am only tired. This is the best place for me." Then he laughed aloud. "I have been sitting here all these years, waiting for something to happen, waiting for my wife to yield with love, waiting for my sons to smile into my face, for my daughter to rush into my arms. Before that, I waited for you and my father. Mother, I waited for you when I was sick and shivering with fear. Everyone is so busy. Ha ha. My wife looks at me with hate now. Something has happened. She was so shy once, hiding behind that radiant hair. Something has happened. My son is afraid of me, as if I would hurt him. No one knows how this hurts me. My heart is gone away to that place where they beat me and beat me. Now everything had happened, and you want to remove me from this place where I have become a man. After she brought him back, Pinyar said, "My boy is being hunted by an evil spirit because we failed to observe certain rites in the past. It was a mistake on the part of our parents and our parents' parents. It was my mistake too, but now I know what we have to do. All the great priests will come to exorcise the bad spirit. I have called them." In his wife's house, meanwhile, Kamur walked up and down, up and down. He jerked his knees, grimaced, and laughed to himself. His heart was no longer where it used to be. Once there was a dwelling place, a place for safe return. Now it was twisted beyond recognition. Only one picture hung before his eyes, like a drawing in blood. His ears hummed with the distant howling of children. "Look what you have done! Look what you have done! You cursed offspring! But it was not me!" he whimpered. Sometimes his anger choked him, and he screamed, "I was a good child. What happened? What happened? This is what I heard. And all this, of course, is conjecture, even rumor. What I did see clearly was Pinyar sitting long-legged on the veranda of her house, saying that she would fetch all the powerful priests from across the river to drive away the spirit that had taken possession of her son. What is about a mother's love? I wondered. After Orca took him away, Kamur had come to see Pinyar once, maybe twice. And it was only about a year that she had kept him with her before that. Yet for years, the fearless and outspoken Pinyar would break down and talk of the squirming, naked child who had wailed in her arms. When people looked at him, he would hide his face against my shoulder. He was so shy. It was whispered now that Pinyar appeared distracted and that she was beginning to smile in a different sort of way. If I had asked her about her son, I was sure that she would have all the words ready in her heart to absolve her son, boy, of any sin. Kamur himself had never had a fit again. He now lived somewhere else, and his wife had gone with him. Pinyar rarely heard from them. Their surviving son was already a stocky lad who had dropped out of school and was looking for a job. No one mentioned anything of the past. The last time I saw Pinyar in her shack at the edge of the forest, she gave me an old necklace to carry for her daughter-in-law. "I travel so much," she said. "I was sure to pass the town where her son lived." She opened the small package wrapped in cloth and showed me the old silver coins strung together with the tooth of a tiger and a wild boar, symbol of luck and success perhaps. Pinyar herself was not sure. She only knew that they were auspicious things to have. "Faith is everything," she said.